Countdown to a counter-offensive on the front line with Ukraine's troops. As its soldiers prepare for a decisive moment against Putin's forces, John sees them grapple with a combination of Cold War weaponry and newly arrived hardware from the West. And at the mounting gravesides, he hears of the soldiers' sacrifice.
You leave this graveside and you head back to the front line.
It's my job. And I do my job to the end.
After President Zelensky's lightning tour of Europe to garner more military support for this moment, we speak to his ambassador to London, who says their troops are under huge pressure to deliver and that fighter jets are needed more than ever to succeed. Also on News at 10 tonight.
Konnichiwa.
Rishi Sunak arrives for the G7 and, with China's threat looming over Taiwan, signs a defence deal with Japan. Recollections may vary, conflicting accounts of the Harry and Meghan chase in Manhattan and criticism of how the whole incident unfolded from Diana's old bodyguard.
What I saw last night was the total mismanagement of a security operation.
The big apology from the water companies over sewage spills, which campaigners say stinks. And breaking the piggy bank, the children negotiating inflation-busting pocket money rises of 11%.
Say usually like, can I have something please? So, and maybe with a little smile on their face or a smirk.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. Only Ukraine's President Zelensky and his generals know exactly when they'll launch their much-anticipated spring counter-offensive to try to repel their Russian invaders. But on the ground and in diplomatic circles, expectation is mounting. In a moment, we'll hear from Ukraine's top diplomat in the UK, who I've been talking to, on the pressures his country's troops are feeling now they've got more of the Western weapons they wanted. But first, our team on the ground has found a mix of preparedness, old weapons and new, yet a determination among Ukraine's soldiers to fight to the finish to reclaim their land.
We are just 2 miles from the front line, with men fighting a 21st century war with 20th century weapons. Past fields where Russian shells have missed their targets, falling short or flying overhead. The youthful crew of a 60-year-old Soviet-era tank prepare to hit back. It doesn't always go to plan. A shovel handle won't shift a misfiring mortar round stuck in the tube.
This is a problem, this means. This is a capsule, cartridge. It's broken. A new mortar from Soviet temperature, yeah? 92 years. 92 years, guys.
This is 92 years old?
Yeah. Okay,
There's a Russian drone overhead looking for them. So every second counts. Every success celebrated. We're close to the town of Vuhledar. After weeks of heavy rain, the ground is drying out. Here, Ukraine could launch part of its spring offensive.
The strategically and symbolic city of Mariupol is about 40 miles across country. To recapture it would be a huge prize for Ukraine. But to cover that kind of distance without air domination, that is a very, very tough task.
In the trenches, 52-year-old Roman and his veteran machine gun are his country's first line of defense. And here, there is no sign of the great counterattack.
F-16 and other jets, armored vehicles, tanks, self-propelled guns and so on. That's what we need to move ahead.
The soldiers tell us the forest is their friend, a place to conceal themselves and their most prized possessions. We're 100 miles to the north with a mobile artillery unit. Under the command of Daniel. He's just 21.
Does this feel like a decisive moment for the war?
I think so. We need to do all what we can, and буде те, що буде.
Will happen what will happen.
Yeah.
Over the radio, an order comes to move quickly. A Russian target has been identified. His team operate one of the first modern self-propelled guns supplied to Ukraine, more accurate over a longer range than anything else we've been shown.
It's a very big victory for me because I'm alive and I'm happy to be alive in this hard time in our country.
Ukraine's Western allies need a victory from the coming offensive to justify their political and military investment. But for Ukraine, it's visceral. How else can a mother find reason in the sacrifice of her son's life? Victor Penasco was killed in Bakhmut on the Eastern Front. His comrades from the battle are among the many mourners.
He was a perfect man. He very like life. I don't know what you say about this war. He died. That's all.
Soon they must summon the courage to return to the battle. They leave behind them many freshly dug graves.
We understand this. We must pain, and we pain. We not have a choice.
For you now, you leave this graveside and you head back to the front line.
It's my job, and I do my job to the end.
The funeral ends in a show of patriotic defiance that finds echoes across the land. John Ray, News at 10, Eastern Ukraine.
Well, I showed John's report to Ukraine's ambassador to the UK, Vadim Prishtaiko, this afternoon when he joined me here in the studio. I began by asking him about the spring counter-offensive and what it was like having the eyes of the world watching and waiting for what will be, as one of those soldiers said, a decisive moment.
Too much pressure, too much expectations, too many of them. And I guess these expectations are overheated. It was painful sometimes for the governments to take this decisive decision to help us and then to find enough ammunition, enough everything in their stockpiles. And we see now that almost depleted. So we have to regain this cycle of production, cycle of bringing it into the action. But that is a very, very important moment. And that's why the president's making all these trips around Europe to get more support.
Yes, and when we're looking at what we heard from President Zelensky after he'd met Prime Minister Sunak this week, he was pointing towards the JETS coalition that he is so keen to secure. But the US is holding back on that.
I guess that sooner or later their position will change. We appreciate the United States doing the most. Sometimes they're reluctant because of the geopolitical reasons and they have big picture in mind.
Do you think any counter-offensive can be truly successful without having the fighter jets, ultimately?
That's a great question. We would, obviously, it would be much better if we can reach out further. That's what our expectation from the very beginning.
And what does success look like with this spring counter-offensive?
This is the war, and the people remind us the fog of war is very thick. So we can have idea in our mind. And me, myself, I'm not sitting in a dark room with my leadership, military leadership, actually deciding where the decisive strike will happen, or there will be a couple of strikes. But judging from the previous encounters, we wanted to, to get the regions which were taken after the 23rd of February 1st. And this is especially important, is the so-called land bridge towards Crimea.
So a land bridge, that land bridge
critical.
would be critical in a counter-offensive. For people who are watching tonight that are wondering, you know, how long does this support carry on for Ukraine in such tough times, what would you say to them?
I would say that the result they see each and every day on their TV, on your channel, this is already enormous achievement. What we have to do, we have to find how we win this time and how we rebuild it.
There may be, though, a situation that arises and arises soon, not least with the US election looming next year, where compromise may have to be a reality. There is also, of course, the potential for Donald Trump to return to the White House.
We understand that the time might come when we won't enjoy such a great support. That is why we have to put all the pressure right now. That's why we were asking our friends, can you bring everything to the table? Allow us to have decisive push this time.
Ambassador, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
Ambassador Prystaiko speaking to me earlier. He also had some interesting things to say about why they are not publishing their casualty numbers. To hear more of the interview, head to ITVX and the news section there. Well, no prizes for guessing that the invasion of Ukraine will be uppermost in the minds of the leaders of the world's wealthiest countries at the G7 summit in Japan. It begins tomorrow. But there is another threat for them to worry about, from China to Taiwan. To show solidarity with the Japanese in the face of that threat, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, on his arrival, agreed a defence and security partnership with Japan.
Rishi Sunak and Akshata Murthy, their first summit of world leaders together, arriving in Tokyo after 17 hours in the air. On the rise, the Asia-Pacific region, which is why the Prime Minister is in Japan, one of its great powers, and why he boarded a Japanese aircraft carrier to cement security and military relations with this ally of the United Kingdom. What does he think he's doing here?
We're announcing a new defence partnership with Japan today, and the closer cooperation between our armed forces, our cyber agencies, and indeed our semiconductor companies and researchers will all strengthen our security at home.
But in Asia-Pacific, the view of the UK and its allies is that its most powerful nation, China, is becoming a threat to our values, our economic stability, our security.
We're increasing our engagement in the region to work with allies like Australia, like Japan, to ensure that the Pacific region does remain free and open. We don't want to see any change to the status quo by force or coercion.
Only 5 years ago, British governments were desperate to get as close as possible to China. But now China is seen as a threat, and this place, Japan, is seen as the great hope.
Konnichiwa.
So the Prime Minister went to woo a bunch of Japanese business leaders, from Sumitomo to Mitsubishi to Mitsui, whom he says are investing £17.7 billion in the UK in wind power, affordable housing and cable manufacturing. Then, in rainy Hiroshima, the American president and the other leaders of the 7 big rich nations started arriving. And would you believe it, shortly afterwards the Prime Minister put on a pair of baseball socks to impress Japan's Premier, Fumio Kishida. They're obviously Japanese socks, not American.
Very good to see you.
But when the two of them had dinner in Mr. Kishida's favourite restaurant, it was altogether more serious, with the threat of Putin and Russia uppermost. Which is understandable in this city, which perhaps more than any other is a memorial of the harm that warring superpowers can wreak. Robert Peston, News at 10 in Hiroshima.
And Debbie joins us now from Hiroshima. And Debbie, as Robert was alluding to there, Hiroshima could hardly be a more evocative backdrop, with a potential conflict looming off the coast of Japan and another running red hot in Europe.
Absolutely, Julie. China and the prospect of conflict over Taiwan is a central concern here at the G7, but at the forefront at the start of this first day will be the Ukraine war and Russian aggression. In the next hour, the UK government will be taking the lead, announcing a new raft of sanctions against key Russian individuals and industries. And Number 10 has told us that they expect other nations will follow. Now, so far, sanctions have done little to deter Russia, and Of course, the commitment that President Zelensky wants, as we just heard from the ambassador, is for more weapons, not more sanctions. The Ukrainian president will join a meeting here on Sunday via video link, and we understand that he has proposed holding a peace summit that is going to be discussed by G7 leaders and could possibly be held this summer. In the next few hours, the world leaders will come here to the Hiroshima Memorial Park to pay their respects to the victims of the atomic bomb. It is a sobering place, and the hosts hope that that will focus minds as these world leaders work towards peace in Ukraine and preventing a war with China.
Indeed. OK, Debbie, thank you very much indeed. Now, whatever the precise facts about the paparazzi's pursuit of Meghan and Harry in New York, there's been criticism of the royal family's reaction. The Sussex's friend and biographer Omid Scobie was quick to point out neither Harry's father, the King, nor his brother Prince William had been in touch to ask if they're OK. Security experts have questioned the level of expertise offered by Harry's protection team.
After Harry, Meghan and her mother, Doria Ragland, left the awards ceremony, there are diverging accounts of what happened next. The royal couple claim they were pursued by paparazzi, which resulted in a near-catastrophic car chase lasting 2 hours. One of the photographers, who didn't want to be identified, told Good Morning Britain Harry and Meghan's driver was the one driving dangerously.
There was zigzagging, there was cutting off, there was like coming super close to the cars, squeezing, wedging.
The couple and Meghan's mother left the Ziegfeld ballroom in their limousine at around 10 p.m. after attending an event. Harry and Meghan's security detail didn't want paparazzi to know where they were going, so along with a police escort, they were driven across 57th Street, FDR Drive and other streets for about an hour and 15 minutes. The Sussexes were driven to a Manhattan police station where they then stayed for around 15 minutes before being picked up by a local yellow cab driver who they flagged down. They didn't stay in the taxi long because of the pursuing press pack. They were forced from these streets back to the police station. An organisation representing some of the photographers has put out a statement specifying there were 3 in cars and 1 on a bicycle. They deny there were any near crashes and even claim at one point Meghan was smiling during the pursuit. Today, unsurprisingly, there was no public comment from the royal family. King Charles was attending a star-studded event in central London, and it was very much business as usual. Those close to Harry and Meghan say the couple have not been contacted privately by the royal family.
It's been very interesting to hear from sources that there's also, despite not being any public statements, also no communication between any royal family member and Harry and Meghan themselves.
Diana's former bodyguard says something clearly went wrong.
What I saw last night was the total mismanagement of a security operation. And, you know, for something like that, you know, if it was so bad at the beginning, the first thing you do is go back into the hotel, you know, talk together and find out how we're going to resolve this matter, not just disappear into the streets of New York in the hope that you'll lose, you know, the paparazzi.
2 conflicting accounts of what happened might ultimately be resolved by footage taken by the photographers themselves and multiple CCTV cameras along their route. Dan Rivers, News at 10, New York.
The cost to taxpayers of organising and policing the public events around the death of Harry's grandmother, the Queen, last September has been set out by the Treasury. A total of nearly £162 million went on the funeral, watched on television by 26 million people, and the Queen's lying in state, where 250,000 filed by in London and 33,000 in Edinburgh. Downing Street said the money made sure people wanting to pay their respects from the UK and across the world could take part safely. Anyone who checks their water bill will know that as well as the cost of getting water into their home, there is a charge for taking it away again. Today, alongside an apology for endless sewage spills that have gone before, water companies finally agreed a plan to upgrade storm overflows. But rather than these multi-million-pound businesses covering the costs, customers will have to pay the extra in their bills for up to a century.
Our waters have become a cocktail of sewage and slurry. pumped into our rivers and seas hundreds of thousands of times each year. Waste was dumped into this Yorkshire river 77 times last year. A story replicated across the country, like here in Cornwall.
Just a couple of weeks ago, there was a disgusting smell coming from this pipe here. We went down to test the samples there and it showed stratospherically high levels of E. coli, which basically showed there'd been a sewage discharge there. We're demanding a complete change in how our sewage system works, so beaches like this aren't polluted by our water companies anymore.
Companies are allowed to dump sewage into open water during heavy rainfall to stop the system overloading and backing up into homes. In 2022, there were more than 300,000 overspills, an average of 824 a day. And yet water and sewage companies paid out £1.4 billion to shareholders in the same year. In England, £10 billion will be spent over 5 years to reduce the spills by 140,000 a year, but that doesn't even half the problem. The chair of the body which represents England's water and sewage companies admits it'll be consumers who eventually pick up the entire bill.
I'm here today on behalf of the water industry to say sorry.
What would you say to consumers who are struggling to pay their bills? And yet now they're going to go up again.
Totally get your upset, your anger and your concern about bills. The cost of living pressures at the heart of our plan. There won't be any uplift in bills over the next couple of years at all.
But none of this addresses another major issue, burst pipes like this one in Bognor Regis.
We noticed several metres of brown floating stuff at the shoreline, which was a bit disconcerting. And then yesterday morning, all these pipes started to appear and about 40 big trucks were taking away wastewater from here. We're a tourist town and there's a yellow warning saying don't swim in the beach today.
Many aren't happy that customers will end up footing the bill for a service that suffered years of underinvestment.
No, Liberal Democrats have argued for some time now for a sewage tax on the profits of the water companies. We think it's the water companies and their shareholders who should pay for this clean-up.
One company has estimated it will increase water bills in 2 years' time by around £90 a year to cover the cost of reducing overspills. But Water UK admit today's announcement is just scratching the surface and say it will take decades to stop the spills completely. Amy Lewis, News at 10.
To another big business that was once state-owned and now finds itself with big decisions to make about the livelihoods of its workers and the kind of service it gives to its customers. BT is going to get rid of around a third of all its staff, up to 55,000 people by the end of the decade, replacing some of those in customer service with artificial intelligence systems. Only 2 days ago, Vodafone said it was cutting its workforce by 11,000. So what is going wrong for the mobile phone companies? This is a lot of families, jobs and livelihoods on the line. Joel is here to take us through it.
It is indeed, Judy, because BT is one of the biggest private sector employers in the UK, but its workforce is set to become a lot smaller. Up to 55,000 jobs, as Julie was saying, will go over the next 7 years. Many of them will be contractors rather than full-time staff. As a result, up to 40% of BT's workforce could disappear. 15,000 jobs will go when BT completes the rollout of full fibre broadband and 5G mobile at the end of the decade. At least 10,000 additional jobs will go because the new networks which BT is installing will require much less maintenance and repair. And more than 10,000 jobs will disappear as BT uses new technology, including artificial intelligence or AI. No surprise, says the Communication Workers Union, perhaps surprisingly, given the scale of the job losses. It sees change as inevitable. Like many companies, BT already deploys AI in the form of a chatbot. Meet Amy, EE's online assistant. But the technology is advancing at pace. Soon it will be able to answer the phone and even call you. And AI will be able to do things humans can't. BT will use it to identify and block fraudulent calls and texts. BT is embracing the new technology, but in a call with journalists this morning, the company's boss warned of the dangers too and called on governments to regulate AI much more tightly.
What we're talking here about is a huge increase in compute power. This new technology, of course, has massive risks if not utilised in the right way. So I can talk all day long about the opportunities, and let me tell you, they are enormous, and it's a really positive move, but we need to be really careful on some of the downsides. In the wrong hands, people can do things that you don't want them to do.
So he wants intervention, but until now the government's been preaching light touch. In a recent white paper, Michelle Donlan, the Secretary of State for Science, set out a pro-innovation approach to regulation designed to make the UK an AI superpower. Tonight, though, Rishi Sunak has insisted what he calls regulatory guardrails will be put in place. Upheaval looks inevitable. A recent report by Goldman Sachs predicts that as many as 1 in 4 jobs in the UK are vulnerable to automation by AI. The good news is history suggests new occupations will emerge. The bad news, Julie, in the short term, accountants, lawyers, architects, coders, city traders, even journalists have plenty to worry about.
You don't say. Joel, thank you very much indeed for all of that. And in a final update on state-owned firms gone private, Royal Mail lost just over £1 billion last year. Customers who aren't getting deliveries on time might not be surprised. Indeed, an investigation into that is underway. The owners blame much of the loss on strike action. Its chief executive has already announced he's leaving. Wasps Rugby Club, twice European champions, will begin next season not in the first or even the second tier of their sport, but in the 10th, right at the bottom. The club went into administration last October and dropped out of the Premiership. But once new owners had been secured, they were offered a place in the Championship, the number 2 league. Rugby union bosses have now withdrawn the offer after the club missed a deadline to prove it could still operate at the required level. In tonight's football, West Ham are through to their first European final since 1976. The Hammers in black confirmed their place in the Europa Conference League final with a late goal from Pablo Fornals away to the Dutch side AZ Alkmaar. The match ended 1-0, making it 3-1 to West Ham over the 2 legs. They'll now play either Basel or Fiorentina. Their semi-final has gone to extra time. Finally, during a season of pay disputes and negotiations, one group has emerged with an inflation-busting 11% uplift without even appearing to try. So who are they? And most importantly, just how are they pulling it off?
Don't be fooled by the innocent looks. These are among Britain's most skilled negotiators when it comes to pay. Whether it's a hard stare, a look of disbelief, or just a charming smile. Many parents find it hard to resist paying a little bit more for cheap manual labour.
Well, I usually help her do the washing machine and then tidy my room and wash up.
I just usually can I have something please? So, and maybe with a little smile on my face or a smirk.
Who was a softer touch, your mum or your dad?
Dad.
An annual survey found that kids' pocket money went up even higher than inflation. An 11% increase in their annual income works out at an average £6.42 per week. 16-year-olds saw the highest weekly paycheck of £12.75, while 6-year-olds saw the biggest pay rise, seeing a remarkable 34% year-on-year growth to reach £3.94 a week. But they aren't all immune from the cost of living crisis.
Me and my sister, we both have £3, but it was 5, but my mum just set it back to 3.
As your costs go up, does pocket money go up at the same rate?
I think it will. I think even the tooth fairy's gone up.
And we know from other surveys that many parents are struggling to feed their kids, never mind pay for treats.
The reality is that there are lots of kids who don't get any pocket money at all, whose parents are really, really struggling during this crisis. We've spoken to parents who, they can't take their kids on any sort of activities at the moment, soft play, swimming, all of that stuff's completely out the door.
Just like the adult world, cash is steadily being replaced by apps and debit cards, giving parents a tighter rein on spending.
Mum makes me save it in a debit account, and I never get to use it.
If I did have tons of pocket money, I might just spend it everything at once.
And their key tip for adults negotiating a pay rise?
Please. Please.
Ian Woods, News at 10.
And that is News at 10 for tonight. We will see you tomorrow from all of us here. Good night.